So I've got a little acetone here on my clean piece of cloth. This is an old t-shirt. You'll notice I moved the soldering station, which is warming up, way off to the side to get away from the acetone. And I'm simply going to wipe these wires like this to get that adhesive and any gunk off of them. Not absolutely necessary, but I like to have my wires clean and looking good as I go ahead and move on to this next stage here. I'll do this on both sections, that is the piece I cut off the sacrificial harness, which is the one in my hand right now, and on the receiving harness itself. Clean these up here. This makes them easier to work with too if they don't have old adhesives all over them and sticking to everything and getting all over your hands. It's just distracting when you're trying to work on something fairly fine like this. This is pretty fine work. So I'll go ahead and complete this cleaning of the harness itself, and then we'll get on to joining the sections together. Off camera, as I was cleaning this section, I decided to pull that wrap and tape back just a little bit further. I cut it back, and then you can see I put a wire wrap temporarily, or zip tie, just to hold that together and keep it from going anywhere. And here you can clearly see that yellow that's making the bend to come up to the opposite ends of the wire. And as I was looking this over, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a bit of a change. I originally was going to leave these 4 coming out of the original harness a little bit different lengths, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make a difference in terms of reducing the size of the bulk. So in order to make it easier to pull these together and have a match, otherwise I'd have to stagger these to match these accordingly so that the wire didn't become unruly. I think I'm going to cut these off equally in size too. And since the blue is the shortest of the 3, the blue and the light brown, I think I'm going to cut the other 2 to match approximately those 2 wires. So it'll be something like that. The green's got to be just a little bit shorter. That's pretty good. And then obviously these will have to be stripped back a little bit again to expose the wire. A little bit more on that one. Give me a little bit of trouble here. There we go. So now they're approximately the same length. Close enough for my purposes. And we're going to go strip these back about the same amount. It's not critical that they match in terms of length. There. Now comes an important step. It's not something you're going to want to forget. And that is we've got to add the heat shrink tubing before we begin any soldering, because if you don't, you've got a problem, because then you can't get the heat shrink tubing on. So what you have to do is determine the approximate length that you need to cut the heat shrink tubing to. So I'm going to use the blue as an example. Those wires, those blue wires are going to end up something like that. So what I want is the heat shrink tubing to overlap each side, and remember it's going to shrink a little bit. Oh, approximately where my thumbnails are, right there. So what is that, 3/4 of an inch or so? So if in doubt, cut it long. I'd rather have the heat shrink tubing be too long than too short, because what we're going to do is we're going to slide it down over like that, all 4 of these, because these are the longest wires. These are longer than what these wires are. So I want to get away from the heat of the joint. And then what did we say, about 3/4 of an inch or so? You want to obviously select the right size heat shrink tubing for the diameter of the wire that you're working with. This happens to be clear. You can get it in black. This is one bag of several that I have of heat shrink tubing in different sizes. It doesn't make any difference what color you use. This won't be exposed anyway. It'll be hidden. So I'm just going to go with clear. It's as good as anything. Again, we said about 3/4 of an inch or so. So if in doubt, cut it long. And I'm going to check this first one before I go any further. I think it's going to be all right, but I want to do a little dry run to see how it'll overlap. I think that'll be just fine. Hard to see that white background. So I'm going to cut 3 more of these, about the same length. There's our heat shrink tubing. Now we're going to slip it over, one over each of the wires. And again, keep in mind, you don't want to forget this. It's easy to do. Don't ask me how I know. Because I want to get it as far away from that joint as possible when I apply heat with the soldering gun. And I'm going to do all 4 of them at the same time so I don't forget them. There. Now it's going to get a little bit more intricate. And what we need to do is pick one of the first one of the 4. It doesn't make any difference, but obviously blue to blue, green to green, brown to brown, etc., and match up the colors. Now what we need to do is separate these wires just a little bit. You can use your finger, you can use a tool, but what you want to do is splay them out a bit like that on each end. So we're working here with the light brown. So let's move on to the light brown here. Get the other 3 out of the way and do the same thing. We're going to splay these out. Just a bit of a circle. I can keep that in focus for you. Like that. And then, next step, we're going to bring those together. Like that. I think you can see how I interlace those. I hope you can. And I'm just going to twist them with my finger. Like that, and hold them together. Now, if I was doing this without recording, I probably would do it a little bit different, but since I'm trying to keep this in focus for the camera, I probably would put one of these in my vise, my bench vise, and the other one I would use I'll set up a little bit of a third hand with a clamp, but since I thought it'd be a little easier to do the video this way, that's the avenue I'm going to choose. Now I'm going to take one of these wires, these fine wires that I had stripped back a minute ago, and just clip one off. And I'm going to bend it in half, approximately half. Like that. And put a bend in it. I think you can see there. Now I bet you can guess what I'm going to do next. And I'm going to do my best here to keep my head out of the way. If I can get a little bit better perspective for you. Again, this is a little delicate, but I'm going to make sure that that joint is nice and tight. Like that. You can see right here. Zoom in a little bit more for you to see it. I don't know if the camera will focus that tight or not, but I think you can see it right there. Then it's a matter of taking this fine wire, and what I'm going to do is create a wrap. I'm going to take that, wrap it like that, and pull it tight, each end. Then it's a matter of wrapping each end around, and it doesn't make any difference where you start. You can start at either end. I'm going to hold the other one tight, and I'm going to wrap. And I'm going to alternate wraps. Now the purpose of the wrap is just to hold the wires together until I can get solder on them. And you just work your way around like that. And as you can see, you don't need heavy wire for this wrap. This is just to hold it in place until we solder it. So now we have the tails of the wrap and pointing in opposite directions. Then I simply am going to take my cutters, my nippers, and cut those off. bend the ends around with my fingers. Like so. Now if you want, you could take a pair of needle nose pliers or something and just gently crimp that. You don't have to. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But now we have the joint pulled together right there. And now we're prepared to solder. Now we're going to add a little soldering paste to the joint. You don't need a lot, so I'm just going to put a little on the tip of my knife like that, and spread it around on the joint carefully. The purpose of the paste is it will melt with the heat and clean any oxidation off the wires, and those wires are fairly heavily oxidized. Here's my soldering gun. Just melting the paste a little bit there, as you can see. Now it's a matter of applying solder. I have pre-cleaned my tip. It's up to temperature. And take a little solder here. And when you solder, you don't heat the solder. See if I can keep my head out of the way. You don't heat the solder, you heat the joint itself. So I got to get those copper wires. Hot enough to melt. The solder. There. Now that joint is soldered, and you can see why I want to keep that heat shrink tubing back, because the heat will activate it. And now that joint has been made. Wipe it off a little bit, because there's a little bit of residue from the flux. We'll let that cool just a little bit. Now if I want, I can take my meter and I can check each of the extreme ends. Back up here for you. I can check each of the extreme ends of the harness to make sure that that joint is good. I'm virtually assured in my own mind that that is a good joint. But we'll go ahead, for sake of argument here, and get my meter out. Remember now, this is a light brown, so I'm going to pick up a light brown here and a light brown here, and we should see that meter change. Bingo, there you go. So you can see that that joint has been, I'm going to pick up another spot here in the wiring harness. It's light brown. You can see there, as well as we'll check in the headlight portion of the harness. You can see there. So I know that joint is intact, and we're about ready to go there. So at this point, there's two different things you can do. You can either slide this heat shrink tubing down like that and heat it, and shrink it and move on, or you can do them all at the same time. In other words, solder them all, then heat shrink them all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, just to complete this video, because I'm not going to do all 4 of these on camera, I'm going to do just, I think, the one. I'll go ahead and now shrink this heat shrink tubing down. I'll show you that operation, and then it's a matter of times 3 more, or 4 more. I got to do 4 of them. So let's go ahead and heat that heat shrink tubing. Here's my little torch. The igniter isn't working on this, so I have to light it off another larger torch, propane torch that I have, but it is lit. See, it's good and hot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start passing the heat shrink tubing in front of you notice I'm holding the wires back. And just heating it all the way around. Now if I was again doing this without a camera, I would have this in my vise and I actually would be holding the torch in my hand and passing it around. But in order to try to capture this in the camera with working alone, I figured this would be the easier way to do it. Get that out of the way. And there I think you can see the joint that's been made. So that's now sealed. It's virtually watertight. And I'll complete what you just have seen on the other 3 wires. It'll be identical. And then I'll end up with a bundle of 4. And then at that point it'll be a matter of starting to rewrap and recondition the harness. Well, that's it for this video, folks. This might have been a long one. I don't know when I edit it down. I'll see how I can do it, keeping it reasonable length. But I did want to show the steps that I go through to repair a harness and to splice it. And we'll continue on working on the wiring harness here in the next video. In the meantime, drop me any thoughts or questions you might have. And as usual, thanks for watching.